Hi friends, welcome to episode 18 of School Librarians United. I am your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian for 12 years and counting, I found myself asking the question, where is the podcast that will help me do my job? I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that the ideas expressed in this podcast are my own, or when appropriate, I always cite my sources. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast has something for you. Before we jump into today's topic, give them what they want, I'd like to consider a thought, and that is designing the perfect library. Every once in a while, my husband will bring home a lotto ticket. I really wish he wouldn't. The grand total is some obscenely large number, and our chances of winning are so incredibly remote. We lose an entire evening making elaborate plans. Invariably, we say out loud what our spending priorities would be, what vacations we'd plan, if we'd keep our jobs. We always agree we would. Pretty sure that our marriage is predicated on both of us doing something somewhere else during the day, and retirement is nowhere on the horizon for either of us. We also decided which organizations we'd support, and I always tell him, I want a brand new library. This week, I've been absolutely riveted by a hypothetical scenario posed on the AASL's discussion board. While other questions are sometimes left hanging and unanswered, this one produced a lot of buzz. Drew Weiberg from Milwaukee posted this several days ago, and a little background on Drew. He works for an architecture firm called EUA, with locations in Milwaukee, Madison, Wisconsin, Denver, Colorado, and Des Moines, Iowa. And here's the best part. His title is Knowledge Manager. I remember being told years ago by my professors that our library and information science degree would open doors. I guess it says something when I admit it never occurred to me to venture outside the traditional school library for employment. But his hypothetical scenario goes like this. You are getting a brand new library, and you've been given exclusive access to the interior designers and architects involved in its design. What advice would you give them in designing the perfect library? Well, spend any time mulling over this online discussion and you will find yourself absolutely lost in thought, daydreaming over designing the perfect library. The responses are so revealing. We all have that pie-in-the-sky vision of what our school library should be, and several respondents were even lucky to have participated in the planning of a full or partial overhaul of their libraries. My favorite response was no less than 84 items that were listed. And all of these recommendations clearly reflect years of on-the-job learning, and for most of us, I imagine, working in a school library, we didn't have the opportunity to design. I really do love this groupthink approach to a hypothetical question, but I'd like to revise the question in a way I think, while less fun, is probably more representative of what many school librarians face every day. I myself work in a district with declining enrollment. Our Board of Education will be deciding this June which grades will be moving, which buildings will be consolidating, and which ones will be closing. The average age of our buildings is 77 years old. I work in the same elementary school my mother attended in the 1950s. We will never be in the financial position to build a new school or a new library. Our current room configurations represent the maximization of space and utility. Our libraries have forfeited shelving and square footage to accommodate all sorts of building needs, from PTO workspace, teacher resource centers, and computer labs, and maker spaces. So the question I would want our collective brain to address is, how do you create the perfect library with your current space and budget? This past October, I presented at our state convention for school librarians. I gave a talk titled, Live Your Best Library. Episode 8 includes a rundown of my presentation and a link to the Google slide presentation in the show notes. I didn't recommend that you hunt for the perfect job in the perfect district with a dream library and a dream schedule. Rather, I focused on recognizing the potential good we can all accomplish regardless of our schedule or our library configuration. I emphasized the importance of our impact on students and staff with whatever opportunity we have. I imagine I will have a future episode which addresses creative funding and inexpensive ways to improve school libraries and the programs we offer. And now, episode 18, Give Them What They Want. I want to kick off this portion of the episode with an happy accident while checking my emails over the weekend. I'm sure many of you have, over the years, subscribed to work-related newsletters, and these tend to populate our email boxes and oftentimes get just a cursory glance, or we make a note to save for a closer look at a later date. And I am so happy I read through this particular newsletter that I received from Colby Sharp last Sunday. I'll include a link to Colby Sharp's newsletter in the show notes. He was very kind and permitted me to share with you this newsletter, and most especially an unforgettable classroom project, which had far-reaching and long-lasting consequences. For starters, Colby Sharp is something of a celebrity in Michigan. As a teacher, reading advocate, and fan of libraries, he is greatly admired by the school librarian community, and I had the good fortune to attend his keynote, which he gave at our state conference this past October. Based in Parma, Michigan, which is in the very middle of the Lower Peninsula, he teaches 5th grade. He started the Nerdy Book Club blog with Donalyn Miller, co-hosts the Yarn podcast with Travis Yonker, heads up the Nerd Camp, which is a free literacy event that takes place each summer in Parma. And in addition, Colby Sharp is an author. He edited The Creativity Project, and he co-authored Game Changer, Book Access for All Kids with Donalyn Miller. In this newsletter, Colby Sharp shared a remarkable experience he had with his students. Quote, "My school doesn't have a certified school librarian. We have an aide that works very hard with what she has. But our school library probably doesn't have the support financially that our students deserve. I'm not blaming anyone at our school. We are playing the hand we are dealt." At a recent staff meeting, the teachers at my school were discussing why our students don't flock to the library like we'd like them to. Our discussion concluded with the realization that we don't have the books in the school library that our students want to read. I was lucky enough to receive a grant to help us build readers at our school. After our staff meeting conversation, it felt like the money should be used to purchase books for our school library. I asked my students what they thought, and they agreed. I figured that if we were going to purchase books that the kids would want to read, we should probably ask them what they wanted to read. I informed my students that they were in charge of purchasing $1,800 worth of books for our school library. It turned into one of the most rewarding and inspiring experiences I've ever had as a teacher. End quote. I want to encourage everyone to view this video. Colby's genuine and generous spirit is evident. He explains how he elected to spend a grant which could have been used to bolster his own classroom library to breathe some new life and exciting titles into the school library. By including his students in the selection process, he guarantees these books will have an audience. As Colby states in his video, his students said, "We know what we want to read." And by gathering input from all 6 grades, elementary school, kindergarten through 5th grade, he ensures that the entire school community will now be more tuned in to the school's library collection and far more enthusiastic to visit and check out books. His students have learned the powerful and lasting impact a library collection can have on students in their school. And finally, Colby concludes his video with an assertion that school libraries and classroom libraries should reflect a balance between, in this case, the librarian's choice and the student's choice. This reminds me, some public libraries have a TAB or Teen Advisory Board, which recognizes the importance of your stakeholders contributing to the decisions in which books will be purchased and which programming would be well received by the teens in their community. actually have several lessons which solicit suggestions from my students and their reading preferences. I like to incorporate a "what books would you buy for our library" into the interest surveys, which some of my students complete at the beginning of the year. Sometimes I have them finish the sentence, "Our library needs more books about ... Usually one of my very first questions to students who are brand new to our school after I introduce myself is, "Tell me about the books you checked out at your school library." I did want to share a fun way to get student buy-in for a collection. Knowing virtually nothing about professional sports teams, when I was overhauling the sports section in my very first library, I made an online survey available to my students for which NFL, MLB, and NBA teams I should buy. And I bought the top 3 vote getters in each category for 3 years running as an ongoing commitment to building an invested fan base. I could be reasonably assured that my students would continue to select their favorite teams and the teams which went to their respective championships. Every once in a while, I will open up my Follett screen and I'll show one of my students the list that I have going, and I let them see how I found the book that they wanted, I found the format that I preferred, and I'd add the book to my list. And I suppose that I think about my book order in much the same way I think about the groceries that I buy each week. I don't want a cart full of groceries I know won't be eaten by people who live in my house. Consequently, among the chicken and the vegetables and the hummus and the Greek yogurt, there'll be bricks of Velveeta, Monster Energy drink, ramen, salami, and boxes of Oreos. I can't stand throwing out food. Buying food my twin 16-year-olds won't eat doesn't make any sense. And yet they're also not the only ones I feed, so I do have to find a compromise. I do want to be careful not to extend this grocery shopping analogy too far. As I'll elaborate in an upcoming episode on graphic novels, all books have merit and value, but books which sit on the shelf unread and gathering dust have absolutely no value. We buy with our patrons in mind, whether those are teachers or students, or to satisfy building initiatives or committee requests, and if there's money left, I target areas of my collection which need the most help. Karina Allen, in episode 67 of the Books Between podcast, described recognizing when books connect better with adults and fail to connect with students. It stands to reason adults rely on their own perspective and life experience, but not necessarily that of a child. As Karina said, quote, "Kids' books are for kids and not for me," end quote. By this rationale, I won't be a fan of everything I purchase for my students. And just because I think a book is terrific doesn't mean students will find the same appeal. A great example of this is the 2008 Newbery winner, Good Masters, Sweet Ladies, Voices from a Medieval Village by Laura Amy Schlitz. As someone who has a history degree and who has taught high school Western Civ before, I loved this book. But I should also understand, and not be offended or surprised for that matter, if my elementary students don't connect with this book. Thankfully, this paradox of purchasing books for my library, which I do not enjoy, is defended by the ALA's Freedom to Read statement, item number 2. Publishers, librarians, and booksellers do not need to endorse every idea or presentation they make available. Well, that's a relief, because I can't pretend to like every book on my library shelves. The very premise of give them what they want should also seem to contradict many of the ideas set forth in episode 5, Book Snob. I describe the expectation that parents and teachers have that school librarians will exercise judgment, and yes, some snobbery, in some purchases because those books have merit and add value to the collection. My students and staff may not recognize that a book I've chosen conveys important messages of acceptance of others' differences and value diversity in our school and communities, or another book which I purchased recently because it represents the story of immigrants in their struggle to start a new life. but those books will find a place on our shelves alongside the books which were purchased to satisfy current student demand and interest. The reason why I purchase books may not be apparent to those who visit the library, but I know why each book was selected. What is curious is when I can think about toilet humor, I'm not thinking about the toilet training books, the books which we had when our kids were moving out of pull-ups and into underpants. I am a huge fan of Prudence and Joshua in Ilona Frankel's Once Upon a Potty. We have both titles from when our own children were little. We even owned Taro Gomi's Everyone Poops. I'm talking more about the proliferation of, it seems, toilet humor, underwear, and all things gross or slime-covered. So what I pose is sort of a library version of a chicken or the egg problem. What is driving this proliferation? The demand from student readers or the publications being turned out by all these publishing houses? Are these books simply feeding an interest by the students, or are these students reading what is being made available in their classroom and school libraries? I suspect it's a little of both. Cindy Dobrez and Lynn Rutan addressed this proliferation in a review they wrote for the Booklist reader on March 25, 2015, titled, "What's with the Underwear in Picture Books?" I'll attach a link in the show notes. An aside, Lynn and Cindy are a book-talking dynamic duo who hail from Michigan. Their specialty is middle grade books, and their session at our annual meeting is always packed. In this article, they review Jared Chapman's Vegetables and Underwear and Tupara Tupara's Polar Bears Underwear. And because I went down that internet rabbit hole, if you are curious, Tupara Tupara, spelled Tupera twice, is the Tokyo-based art and design firm of artists Tatsuya Kamayama and Atsuko Nakagawa. They are also the author and illustrator of two books, Whoosh and Make Faces. This article really is a conversation between two friends who love books and conclude that the popularity of underwear can be attributed to one thing. Said Lynn, quote, "Underwear makes kids giggle," end quote. And I especially appreciate Cindy's advice not to do Google image searches of these titles for obvious reasons. Along the similar lines, Bianca Schultz wrote an article for the Children's Book Review, an article posted on November 23, 2014, quote, 7 underwear books for kids, including one big pair of underwear, end quote. I'll include a link in the show notes. And a short interview with author Laura Gell of One Big Pair of Underwear, who revealed her secret, quote, "Underwear makes everything easier," end quote. She even included a list. Quote, 1, easy way to get kids and adults to pick up your book. Put a picture of underwear on the cover. Item 2, easy way to make kids laugh while reading your book. Use the word underwear multiple times in the text. Item 3, easy way to get kids excited about your school visit. Pull out a giant pair of underwear. Item 4, easy way to get people to your table during book fair. Decorate your table with underwear. And item 5, easy way to make memorable business cards, stickers, or bookmarks, underwear. End quote. So this is Amy again. Including underwear in picture books seems to be a slam dunk. And given just how competitive the market is, who can blame an aspiring author or illustrator for their chance to succeed? As I hinted several weeks ago in the podcast about celebrity authors, I have a suspicion that many people mistakenly think that writing and or illustrating children's picture books is somehow easy. Don't get me started with all the self-published picture books that are out there. We've all come across them, and I'm sure that you, like me, have had some random person hand you a book that they self-published and said, "Here, I want you to put this in your collection." That is a future episode in the making. So, do any of these titles ring a bell? Because while this will never be a complete list, it is also no particular order. Obviously, the leader of the pack, Captain Underpants, followed by Creepy Pair of Underwear, Veggies with Wedgies. Our principal is in his underwear, which will come out January 2019 by Stephanie Kalmanson. Wolf in Underpants, published expected March 2019 by Wilfred Lupino. Dinosaur Love Underpants, Monster Love Underpants, and Aliens Love Underpants by Claire Friedman. And those are just the ones with underwear or underpants in the title. There are countless picture books with characters in underwear, sitting on the toilet, streaking down the street. No David fans. What gets me are the surreptitious appearances of toilets and underwear that sneak into picture books. I chose a seemingly innocuous book to read to my kindergartners called You Can Read by Helene Becker and Mark Hoffman to fill some time when an assembly they attended ran short. I did make the mistake of not reading this book before I read it to them, and I also didn't purchase this book. And there's nothing wrong with it. I was just surprised. And it's described in Amazon as a fun and funny celebration of literacy. Kids of all ages will discover that the act of reading is a daring adventure that can take you anywhere. You can read at the playground, under the sea, at the opera, and even in outer space. It turns out you can read everywhere, and when you do, you open yourself to a universe of adventure. Thank you, Amazon. Yes, and don't forget, you can also read on the toilet. They neglected to mention on the page or the description that the reader will be treated to a picture of one of the characters reading on the toilet. I'm not being prudish, but this is pandering for laughs and gratuitous. It's wholly unnecessary. Let's consider some other titles, which you are welcome to purchase for your collection. Walter the Farting Dog series, the Icky Sticky Gross series. Why do we fall for this every time? Gross Job series by Nikki Clapper. Super Simple, Super Gross Science series. Make Your Own Fake Snot by Julia Garstecki. The Gross Cookbook by Susanna T. The series Disgusting Creature Diets by Jody Sullivan Rake, published by Capstone. And these titles include The Poop and Puke Eaters, Blood Suckers, Carcass Chewers, and Garbage Gorgers of the Animal World. The series Our Gross Awesome World 6-book series includes such titles as Awesome Disgusting Unusual Facts About School by Eric Braun and published by Black Rabbit Books. I do want to briefly mention an article posted in the New York Times on November 16, 2018 by Idra Novi, titled Beyond Battles, Boogers, and Pranks. I'll attach a link in the show notes. This article is so chock full of issues related to gendered books. It also touches on race and ethnicity in picture books and the emotionally complex books which seem to be reserved for girls and elude boys, like the author's son. I know I will refer to this article in future episodes, but for now, Idra Novi laments that her son and friends in the 2nd grade enjoyed reading C.C. Bell's El Deafo, quote, a rewarding change from the usual fare recommended to them, those ubiquitous titles that deliver endless action and flatulent jokes. End quote. She said, quote, it made me wonder why boys at this age, the chapter book years, when they're reading on their own, but not full-on novels, are pushed mostly toward shallow books full of battles, boogers, and pranks. End quote. I can't help but sense a little shade being thrown at the unmentioned individuals who are foisting these, quote, endless books about toilets and sword fights, end quote, on her son and the boys in his class. As I mentioned before, this article tackles some very large issues in our libraries, and I'll revisit it in the future. I feel like I'm ending this episode with a challenge to ask yourself, what balance do you strike in your purchases? How do you know you are both satisfying the demands and interests of your readers and assembling a collection whose content offers the most far-reaching and representative of the human experience? I would like to thank you for listening today. If you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Share this podcast with other school librarians in your district and your PLN. Consider leaving a rating as it helps other school librarians learn about this podcast. I would like to thank composer Nazar Ryback at hooksounds.com for the music you've heard today. And as always, I invite your feedback and contributions. Please email me at schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter. The topic of our next episode will be podcasts. Where do they fit into your life? I hope you will tune in.